So our next speaker is Angie Albright. She is a dedicated museum professional and community advocate based in Northwest Arkansas. She serves as the director of the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History in Springdale, where she leads efforts to preserve and share the rich cultural heritage of the Ozarks. With a passion for history, historic preservation, rural culture, sustainability, and community engagement, Angie has been instrumental in developing educational programs and exhibitions that connect the public with the region's past. Her interests also include promoting local agriculture and supporting leadership development initiatives. Her doctoral studies focused on the new historicism in African American literature and culture. Please welcome Angie Albright.
Good afternoon. I'm so glad to be here. I think when we start talking about Monte, there's something a little bit different about it from some of these other locations that we're talking about today. And I'm not surprised, though, that somebody asked to have this included because people are fascinated with Monte. And I'm going to ask that question to the audience again at the end of this talk. I moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas in 1987 as a college student from Iowa, and I've been hearing about Monte since that day, right? But the question I want to ask first, it's a rhetorical question. What is the story of Monte? Is it a story about tourism? Yes. Is it a utopian dream? Is it a story about arrogance, delusion, or vision? A lot of the things that you read about Coin Harvey, I'll tell you who he is in a minute, and Monte, it's always this language that's very cloudy and pretty, and he was a visionary with unfulfilled dreams. And I want to ask a different kind of question. So you're going to pick up on some of my skepticism about that take as we go along. But that's the cool thing about history, right? We learn more, we think differently over time, and I think we can come to some of this with a new approach. One of the things I also like about history and working in a museum is always trying to connect what happened in the past to the present, or finding out that what you thought was the past was only the middle of the story. It wasn't the beginning, right? There's almost always a story underneath the story. So we're going to talk about that for just a minute too. So Monte is in a little south of Rogers, kind of between Rogers and Springdale. It's easy to call a lot of places in Arkansas the middle of nowhere. It's not exactly the middle of nowhere, but there was a pretty lake, Spring Creek, not a lake yet. One of the things I was thinking about during Michael's presentation too was our obsession with containing water and figuring out water. So we're going to come back to that too. Okay, so this is Coin Harvey. His name is William Hope Harvey. And I had thought when I dug back into this again, I really just wanted to talk about the town and like, enough about that guy. Oh, you cannot talk about this place without talking to him. He becomes the center of the story, and that's really exactly how he wanted it. So kudos to Coin, we're still talking about him. He was born in Virginia, what's now West Virginia, in the late 1800s, and studied law, became an attorney, moved to Chicago, goes to Ohio, gets married, and moves around and moves around and moves around and moves around. Very itinerant in a lot of ways. Never made any money. He had a lot of great ideas. And in Monte, he had another great idea, still didn't make any money. So he finally made money in what I think is the ultimate ironic situation, I guess, by publishing a book in Chicago called Coin's Financial, I just lost, I looked at it, financial book, I think. And it's a series of 6 lectures about this little boy, his name is Coin, and Coin Harvey hadn't started going by the name Coin yet, but it was clearly him. has series of 6 interactions, like lectures, with famous people about money and financial prowess and that kind of thing, which was ironic because the guy never really had a lot of financial prowess. And so the thing that made him the most money was this book about that he published in 1894 from his own publishing company called the Coin Publishing Company, and and it sold millions. It was a bestseller and got the attention of William Jennings Bryan even. So there is kind of a view from a while ago of kind of a bird's eye view of where Monte is. Definitely windy roads and trees, very heavily forested. A black and white photo of the early days, but let me look. So in some of Harvey's travels, dragging his family literally around the country from place to place, one of the places he landed was in Ogden, Utah, where he managed to come up with this great idea for this Mardi Gras-like festival, the Monte Cristo. Its name was something to do with Monte Cristo, and it was hugely popular, did not make any money, so he had to move. And this is what would happen again and again. He goes to Pueblo, Colorado. He first went to this silver mine place, and that collapsed elsewhere in Colorado, and then he went to Pueblo, where he developed, I think I have a picture of it. Oh, the building at the top. It was this mineral palace. It was a big exhibition hall. Thank you. A big exhibition hall that celebrated the mining culture and industry of Colorado. Again, very popular, hugely successful. He left town with no money. So he had stumped for William Jennings Bryan in his presidential campaign in the late 1890s, and he had stopped in Arkansas at that point. And so he had this positive view of the Ozarks, and he decided to give it a try, and he goes back to the Ozarks there around Mount Monte. And he has now made this money from his Chicago publishing company, and he sold this book, so he's able to buy a small acreage, and then 320 acres in particular at what is called Silver Springs. Yes, his friend William Jennings Bryan. One of the things that I find, thank you, really, much better, thanks. We all know these people who have a lot of tall tales. And you wonder, like, really? Are you that big a deal? And then there are these moments where you're like, no, that really did happen. So Coin is making a name for himself through the publishing, but also because he was a proponent of bimetallism. Just talk about a niche economic topic. He hated the gold standard, as did William Jennings Bryan, and he ultimately starts pulling for the use of silver as a 16-to-1 ratio to gold, and that's what we should be basing our economy on. Well, he comes to this conclusion after the silver collapse in 1897, and that's when he decides we should be basing everything on silver. I am no economist, but I don't get it. So I think that's an interesting start to this obsession he had with the silver industry. But he does get the attention of Bryan, and he goes all over the country stumping for him, and now he's this best-selling author, so he has some authority. And Jennings ends up coming to Arkansas a couple of times to see Harvey, and so he really did have some clout. Another bird's eye view of the region. So this is the story underneath the story. Before Monte, there was already a thing, Silver Springs, and they often got confused with Siloam Springs, which became a problem when they went to get a post office registration. The same thing happened with Springdale, and it's why we're called the Shiloh Museum. Shiloh was the original town name, but there was already a Shiloh, Arkansas. So this is happening all over in the late 1800s, where towns are incorporating, they're trying to find their way, and that's certainly what happened here. But Silver Springs had a mill, this is an example of that, and a tavern, pre-Civil War tavern. So people were already kind of accustomed to the region as a place to go, a place where things are happening. And this Silver Springs is, it was Spring Creek, And there were, I think, 7 springs that fed the creek. And that's going to matter here in a second. So one of the things that Harvey does when he shows up is he hires masons and construction workers, and they rechannel everything to make a lake, which they call the lagoon, for the life of the resort. And he just is going to impose his will on this piece of land. And this is where these are those great stories that you find in mythology. What happens when man goes up against nature? Like, it's really hard to do. You might be able to do it for a while, right? But you're probably doomed from the get-go. But he channels all of these springs and the creek and turns the whole thing into this big lagoon and a lake for, in his vision, is kind of the center of what will be his resort. He even created a dam. At this point, dammed water there, obviously lovely. Also going to be ironic, as it will also be a dam that will kill the place too. So, nearby, has anybody been to Blue Spring in Eureka Springs? Do you know what I'm talking about? And that is another great example of, and same with Hot Springs, Beaver Lake, an attempt to, it's a beautiful spring and it's a beautiful spot, and the Native Americans used it for growing, but healing, living, all that kind of thing. And then an industrialist wanted to make it a water bottling factory, right, and use the water and sell it, and guess what, that didn't work out either. So Arkansas, we're always trying to deal with all these springs, right? They're so cool, and we can't quite figure out how to contain it, I guess. So this is the Hotel Monte, and in 1901, he starts building everything. He puts in $48,000 of his own money, $52,000 of everybody else's money. He had to have been a really powerful persuader and salesperson. He got, over and over again, got people to buy into his project, even though there was never any money in their coffers when he was asking. That is fascinating to me. So the Hotel Monte was the first one. It wasn't the star of the show. It was at first, but it wasn't intended to be long-term. So if you were at Monte, you would have been lots of things to do later on. But at first, it was a lot of just sitting on the porches and enjoying yourself. I think there's yes, like that. A lot of socializing and taking strolls and that kind of thing. Over time, his intent was to build a really fancy hotel called the Clubhouse Hotel, and these 4 other lodges, and they were all to be named after surrounding states. He did get through Missouri, Texas, and Oklahoma Row. That's what they're called, and we'll look at a picture of that in a minute. And he didn't get to the 4th, and he never got the Clubhouse Hotel built. He barely hung on. So what you're seeing here, really interesting, he got a gondola. I don't know how in 1901 you get a gondola from Venice, and you get a gondolier to come and teach you and a few other people how to use it. Now it would be so easy, right? You just write to the, I don't know, the chamber, the tourism bureau, something in Venice, if we were to do that now. But in 1901, how do you find that? I think that's kind of remarkable, his resourcefulness. And his idea was, the gondola was great. And then in 1902, he builds his own railroad, private railroad. And it's a 5-mile spur. Rogers didn't like that much. The city of Rogers, in fact, he went to Rogers first, to the city, and to Lowell, and said, hey, let's do some railroad business. And they all said, no thank you, because it would mean all these people leaving their commercial areas, their residences, to go hang out in another city. And it's their job to develop their own cities, right? I mean, you can kind of understand it. But so he builds this railroad in 1902, and he uses the gondola that he's been trained on and his trained staff on to pick people up at the railroad, because people aren't driving as much yet. And this is a vast improvement from all those other resorts where people would have to get off the train and then take a buggy or some other dusty, terrible ride to the hotel. And imagine the vision getting off of the train and stepping on to a gondola, and then you disembark at the Monte Hotel. Isn't that a lovely? He did it. It worked for a while. See, doesn't the gondola look fun? That is probably, I think that's Missouri Row. One of the things that's interesting when he starts building these kind of lodge buildings, they're really long and they're log structures. And he's using a lot of cement, and one of the first to use a certain kind of cement and stone construction in the country, actually. And we'll see one of those in a minute. Every room had a fireplace, they had electricity, things like that. So this is the kind of his plot map for what he thought he was going to be able to do. I suspect, I don't ever see this in the analysis, but when you think like a business person, I kind of wonder what he was up to, because he in part wanted to build a resort. He wanted a place for rich people to come. Even though he was a populist, he wanted a place for people to come and relax and all of that kind of thing. And he said no children. At his resorts, you could have no children, and you could not be ill, which is the opposite of hot springs or Eureka Springs, right? The springs are this healing thing. No ill people and no children. Sounds awesome. And he cut off the electricity every night at 10 o'clock. He had a curfew. So the whole place had to shut down. You could be dancing. You could be doing all the things that you do in a resort. And at 10 o'clock, it all had to stop because he believed that. And there is a story, an anecdote that he, one night actually turned off the electricity when a bunch of very rowdy young women stayed out till 2 a.m. And he got fed up, so enough of that, and the electricity goes off, at 10 o'clock after that. So that doesn't sound utopian to me, okay? And there's no, there's no democracy, there's no voting, this isn't an incorporated town exactly. So I point that out to say, so he wanted this resort, but he wanted it to be a certain way. At the same time, he's building a bank. He built, there's a post office and a general store, and he tried to invite industry to come and build up their businesses there on Factory Street. So he names it Factory Street and then invites the industries. They didn't come. And you have to think, well, if you can't have children at the resort, so are you going to be a resort or are you going to be a town? And I feel like he was trying to do a whole bunch of things, and to me that seems like maybe one of the reasons it wasn't sustainable. If you're not sure exactly who you are, you might not be able to pull it off. Yes, that is Missouri Row also, and you can see it's early in its construction. You can see how it's long with those almost like turrets, high ceilings in central areas. There's a pretty postcard with the lagoon and the gondola. So Oklahoma Row comes along. So he's built Missouri Row in 1901, 1902, about the same time as the hotel. In 1905, he's trying to build the Oklahoma Row structure, and he is out of money. And he tells his son he is desperate, and telling his family that, this is kind of the end. If we can't get this done, we can't get it done. At every other opening, the hotel and Missouri Row, Jeff Davis, governor, had come, Hillman Bruff, Charles Bruff had come. You've got all these dignitaries coming for the openings. It takes him 2 years to build Oklahoma Row, and nobody shows up. And he didn't try too hard because it wasn't going well, and he wasn't sure about it. Now, one of the things that makes this interesting is on the far left, you can see the tower. And it doesn't really match. It looks very castle-like, right? And a little bit Gothic compared to the rest of the structure. It would end up being, it wasn't the last thing standing, but it was standing until 2023. But again, it was done in this construction method that was new to the United States. It was cutting edge, which is also interesting, again, in the middle of Arkansas, right? Another view of Oklahoma Road. And this fireplace picture is going to come up again for a reason, but all the rooms had things like this. I think this is actually in the tower. And again, but it's all cement, it's all concrete and stone, and you know, there's rugs there and things on the wall, but it had to have been a little bit stark, I would guess, a little bit lacking in warmth. Built a school, there's the bank. One of the interesting things that happens, he also issues his own script when things are going really badly later on. Guess what? That didn't pan out. So he's trying to issue his own money. There's the swimming pool, which is really great and interesting. So people came, but then in the 20s, and he never had any money. He kept getting people to invest. And then the stock market crash in 1929 kills it off. The railroad he'd had to sell in the 20s. So the railroad only lasted less than 20 years, but he'd had to sell it to fund and finance his other endeavors there. Fox hunting, tennis, bowling, billiards, croquet, golf. What is believed to be the first golf course in Arkansas. I'm not sure that that is verified, but I did see that somewhere. But the stock market crashes in 1929. That obviously is going to kill a lot of economic dreams, right? But then people start doing other things. And one of the things that I am most interested in for the purposes of thinking about him is the Ozark Trails Association that he started in 1913. And again, tried to get Rogers involved. Didn't work out. Because what he wanted to do was super smart. And again, this is what we've been trying to figure out in Arkansas and the Ozarks especially. How do we get there? There are a lot of rocks and mountains and curves, and how do we figure this out? And the Ozark Trails Association was an advocacy group trying to do new roads, and all those roads, by the way, would lead to Monte. But again, it didn't really pan out, but we're still working on that in the Ozarks. How do you get from here to there? And I sit in city council meetings and I listen to these conversations about zoning and the new streets and the roads and the bypasses and all those things. We're having the same conversations over 100 years later. There he is as an older man. His personal life is very interesting. That's a separate talk. But he was estranged from his first wife, and then he married his secretary. She'd been his secretary for 25 years, and his wife had not really, the first wife had not really ever lived in Arkansas. She stayed in Chicago. And then in 1936, common sense. This cracks me up. Look at the language there. You must read this. This is a great book in magazine form. You won't be informed unless you read my book. And that's all on the cover, which makes me laugh. And his big dream was to build this obelisk that would have all these materials like a time capsule for future civilizations. All of his wisdom would be collected. It never got built. There's the amphitheater that he built. This is what people love to see. They're still fascinated. It's underwater, under Beaver Lake, when Beaver Lake was dammed in the 60s and the whole place was flooded. When the water is low, you can still see a piece of this. And this is what people are fascinated with. There is a story that there is gold buried, like either in his mausoleum or in the amphitheater. But I'm thinking, you know what? That guy was broke. If there was gold, he would have gotten it out. So he dies in 1936 he, by the way, ran for political office in 1932 under the Liberty Party, and it was the only time a national convention has been held in Arkansas for any party, was in 1932. He dies in 36 from influenza, and he has a total of $138, and he's $3,000 in debt. So. That's not weird at all. After he died in early 36 in a really, really bad cold spell, and the funeral director had a few days to wait till he could be buried, so he made a death mask. This was not Coin Harvey's wish, but I think he would have wished it if he could have. This was his kind of thing. And this is at the Rogers Historical Museum, if you ever want to get a closer look at Coin. And there is his mausoleum he built for him and for his son. And they are there underwater, under Beaver Lake. So the buildings, there was a Camp Joiselle there. They tried to do lots of other things. 2 years ago, finally, the Texas Row building that had just turned into a giant shed collapsed finally. And then the Oklahoma Row Tower, let me get to the end of this. That's from a few years ago. This is more recent. There's Texas Row building. So I'm pointing this out, that fireplace there, to what I saw a couple years ago. And then they tore it down. The Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of it. And they had to tear this down, even though there was a big fence around it, because the vandals, the drugs, the just mischief and all the things. You can see there's a fence. But now the Army Corps of Engineers, the Rogers Museum and Shiloh Museum, we have an interpretive 1-mile trail planned with photos. Most of these photos are from Rogers and Shiloh. And so the photos will point you in the direction and try to help you the visitors see what it would have looked like at the time. So my question is, this is a very short-lived period of history. But we're still really fascinated by it, and I'm not completely sure, maybe because it's underwater, and that makes something more interesting. And, was this arrogance? What is the psychology behind somebody who just wants to impose their own vision and make everybody live a certain way? It didn't grow organically. I suspect that's one of the reasons it failed. If it doesn't grow organically, maybe it doesn't work. I'm thinking about Silicon Valley, there's a whole town they're building, trying to build. Bella Vista, planned community. So, lots to say about Coin Harvey. Thanks.